Hey guys, last Monday, on this Monday, one of our teachers was out for the first day, and I was asked to substitute. I got the message pretty late the night before, and kind of had to scramble at the last minute to try to figure out what to do. I will say that the teacher did send their plan, but unfortunately, I didn't get it until the next morning because of a lapse of communication. So, anyways, I was also able to, have to approach a unit on day one, and I thought it might be interesting to share with some of you what I did to prepare for day one of a unit. So first, I pulled up the unit guide for the unit. And I knew that given that it's day one, week one, part of my goal was going to be to preview the unit, the big idea, the essential questions. Another goal might be to preview the vocabulary, to preview some of the assessment questions. I knew that there were some hook activities to do, and on and on and on. So I looked at the schedule, and I was going to be gifted about 4 hours with them that day. So I went on to ChatGPT, as I do, and I attached the unit guide. You might not be able to see it right up close here, but I attached the unit guide, and I attached the unit planner that the teacher had done and completed. And then I said this: I have to substitute tomorrow for our high school class. I will be teaching for 4 hours. This is given context to what I need. This is the first day of the unit on political systems. I have attached the unit guide. I will also attach the teacher's unit planner. As it is the first day of the unit and I'm only subbing, I want to make sure I set the students up for the unit and do a good preview. I have time from 8:30 to 10:30. The students take a 20-minute recess, and then I have from 10:50 to 12:30. Again, you'll see that I'm giving it as much content as necessary so it can give me a proper answer. You can add an additional half hour of time that we'll have in the afternoon to work independently. I have a few goals, but we don't have to do them all on the first day. And this is where I list the goals that I just mentioned. Things like introducing the big idea and essential questions. I want to have students working in groups or independently as much as possible. As little teacher talking to the whole group as possible. But some is okay. Opportunities to meet with the 3 reading groups for at least 20 minutes each, perhaps longer. Maybe do a hook activity. Give students a chance to see the writing text type, the assessment questions, and essential vocabulary. Have students set goals for themselves for the unit, for their learning and their math and reading. Have students brainstorm what they already know about this topic. Have students list what they want to know, KWL. Show them some of the playlist items. I like for students to have many options and not all do the same thing at the same time. And I need to express my expectations for behavior to them and take attendance. I will need explicit instructions. This is where you're telling the AI exactly what you need. I will need explicit instructions on whether I need to create any documents, print anything, put things around the room, etc. If I need to create something, give me the ChatGPT prompt. Ask me any questions if you need clarification. And I thought that's kind of an interesting one to let people know is sometimes it will give you an idea on a lesson plan, but if that requires something that you print, okay, tell me the prompt so that I can use that prompt on ChatGPT to print. And it gave me a list. It gave me a bunch of things to do, things to print, how to set up my room, digital tools, a schedule, and on and on and on, okay? And I liked it okay because it's pretty critical that you look through that. It also gave me some prompts for things like a KWL chart, a personal goal setting, and on and on and on. When it asked me about things to create, I said on the KWL chart, it should say what we know, what we want to know, and what we learned. It created one for me. Okay, you can kind of see that right here. I thought it was all right. Okay. I said I need it to be printable, and I need you to do worksheet prompts for the other things that you said there. And then I said make it so I can just copy it over to a Google Doc, because ultimately, I don't want to use code or anything. I just want to be able to quickly do it. So it made them. It made multiple worksheets. I would get the text and I would copy it over onto a Google Doc. So at the top of my screen here, I've got like a bunch of these. I had it make a personal learning goals worksheet, which I ultimately didn't use, but I made one. I had it create a KWL document connected to our unit. And I actually cut the L. I'll say that in a later prompt, but I cut out the learned because they haven't learned anything yet. So I don't want to put that. I had it create the big idea and the essential questions. And it turns out that the teacher already had that up in the room, but I really didn't know if that was going to be there, and I wanted to make sure that I had that posted in the room. So I printed that up and I just put it in a different area of the room so that no matter where the kids were looking, they might see it. I made it really big too so that I could just put it up on the wall. I'll maybe show you this later in the video, but I also went onto the unit guide. I took the vocabulary and I asked ChatGPT to make a matching activity for me with instructions, really crystal clear, simple instructions. So it made this matching activity. It listed all 25 of the terms and the instructions were clear. Match each political term in column A with the correct definition in column B. Write the letter of the definition next to the number of the term. So this is the type of activity that you might be able to do with your students at the beginning of a unit, every unit, right? And it lists all these definitions, right? If I were working with a younger class, I would not have given them 25. I might have given them half of that. I might have also divided the terms up amongst groups. But this is what I did. And with the older group, I was able to give them all. And I had that worksheet ready. I also went on the unit guide and printed out the assessment questions. So those are on every unit guide. They have basic level, intermediate level, and advanced level, and they have questions. I just simply put them on a doc and printed them. When I was thinking of hook activities, the hook that the teacher had was a good hook. I mean, it was on the list, but I didn't think that it was right for me to do the hook since I was subbing, do that hook. And number two, I wanted something that would require as little like printing and prep as possible because I didn't have a lot of time. So I found one that I really liked. It was this political ideology speed dating game. And I went on the unit guide and I took that activity, the description of that activity from the hook. And again, I went back to ChatGPT and had it create a lesson plan for me. And it created a lesson plan that I thought was okay, but as I read over it, I realized that it didn't have enough questions. And also some of the questions were overly generic, and I didn't think that would be like really exciting or thought-provoking for the kids. So I had to kind of keep giving it feedback before I got it right. So I got the layout of the activity. I asked it to tell me a script of things I should say since I'm going to MC the activity. And then I printed it. So I have this out here, and it gave me, how to do the rounds and how much time to spend with each level, kind of stuff I should say, and then a bunch of questions that I could ask. So that was really cool. What else do I have here? I also, because one of my goals was to introduce them to the text type of the unit. This text type was narrative. So I went on ChatGPT and I asked ChatGPT to create a narrative related to, and I pulled one of the writing topics from the unit guide. This one was my first election experience. And I asked it to write one for me at a 9th grade level. The students in that class are from 10th to 12th. And the reason that I asked it to do it at a 9th grade level is because my goal here is not necessarily to show them superior level of writing, but instead to show them a basic, clear, understandable level of writing. I don't want to challenge their reading in this moment. I wanted to really introduce them to the structure of the text type. So I created this very short text. And then after I created that text, I went, again, right back to the ChatGPT and said, take that text, here's the rubric that we use for narrative text types, and break this text down into a graphic organizer, which it did for me. I mean, it was really cool. It took the text and it made a graphic organizer that included different elements such as exposition, setting, characters, conflict, rising action, all the parts of narrative. And it put examples and details from the story that were representative of that. Then again, since I wanted them to actually have something to do besides read that narrative, I created, via ChatGPT again, discussion questions about the text as well as discussion questions about the graphic organizer. So I have them all here and ready to go. What else did I do? Okay. I then took all of the activities that I had. I knew that I was going to do the hook activity, the speed dating. I knew I wanted my students to do narrative, read that narrative text. I knew we wanted to introduce them to the reading texts. So I looked on the library for whether we had the physical copies of those, and I also made sure that if we had digital copies of some of the books that the teacher had recommended, that I put links to that online, on the board, so that they knew how to find it. So I wanted them to do that. I also wanted them to be able to work on math, of course. So I wanted that. I wanted them to preview vocabulary, to preview the assessment questions, to do the KWL, and then I added a couple of things from the playlist that I thought were specifically connected to the hook. Because the hook was about political ideology, there was a video that kind of explained different political ideologies, and also there was an online quiz where you could answer lots of questions about your feelings about various subjects, and it would tell you where you lean on the political spectrum, whether you lean more toward the left or the right, and it really was kind of, I thought, pretty interesting for students to be able to see the types of questions that would help them determine what political ideology means. So I wanted them to do that, but I also knew that, if they're going to do that, how do I know they do it all? So I think this is a pretty critical piece, is that I created a student tracker, okay? I made it in a couple seconds, again using ChatGPT, and I added the activity. I put instructions at the top, the instructions: choose an activity from the list below, write the start time and the end time for each activity you complete. Keep track of the people you work with and jot down quick notes about what you accomplished. Rotate through as many activities as possible. This is kind of like a playlist, but it includes all the things that I was hoping they might do. These are not assignments necessarily, and some of these things aren't actually to be turned in. And I think that's another important point, is if you're going to create a space for students to discuss questions, to learn vocabulary, to practice writing, it doesn't always need to be for a grade. And you might ask, well, if it's not for a grade, then why would they do it? And I think these trackers really, they solve that issue. They do it because they're documenting what they've done, and you have evidence of the things they worked on. And then whenever you have this moment to check in with them, whether it's in your small groups or individually, if you're seeing that they're really flying high with the unit, you don't even need to check this. But if you notice that they're struggling, they're bored, they're not into it, or they seem to be distracted, you can go back to these trackers and say, well, I noticed that you're not spending enough time in this area or that area. It might also help you with knowing how to prioritize what a kid should be working on, because a kid might actually be very enthusiastic about the unit, but not spending enough time on writing or math, and this would help document it. Now, ultimately, this is based on the honor system, but one thing that you might want to do if you don't have a class culture that is built around the honor system, one thing that I've done in the past is to have group leaders. And I don't necessarily mean that it has to be the writing leader or in a particular math group, but it's just a number of students in the classroom that everyone trusts. I would have my students elect these before I told them the purpose of the election, but who are the most trustworthy people? And I'd have those 4 or 5 students be responsible for confirming the student tracker. So for example, if a little kid, Joey, completes their student tracker for the day or for the week, you might do this for the week so you don't have to do this every day. They did this for the week and they're ready to turn it into you as evidence of the things that they worked on, the areas they prioritized, and you're going to use that as kind of evidence as well for their participation, their productivity. Before they show it to you, they have one of those trustworthy students also sign it. And my experience has been that those trustworthy students are so ethical that they're never going to sign a document that they don't believe is true, that they haven't seen to be true. So they're going to ask for the evidence for you. The student's going to track their learning for you, and then you're not going to have to spend as much time doing that. All right. The other things that are pretty critical. So I have all these activities here. And I even further at the bottom gave more instructions about each activity. But another thing that's critical in order to operate this is a room in which students can move, and also, this is important, a room that you can manage. I knew that I needed to know what students were working on without, going over their shoulder or looking on their screen or in their notebook. So I created signs, and I know this might be flipped here, but created signs. This one says vocabulary practice, and it has the instructions. And this one is text type analysis. That's the title for a station that I would use over and over again. I want them to read the text type. I want them to practice vocabulary. Reading preview has nothing to do with politics. It literally is just about previewing the reading. So I would put that as a center that I would again and again come back to. And I put the instructions, really simple instructions. Start reading the first chapter, read really simple instructions. Math practice, assessment questions, and on and on. And then I placed these papers on the wall in different areas of the room, near desks, so that there were workstations for them. And in truth, it's not necessary for a kid can work on vocabulary really anywhere in the room, right? But the reason that I want them to work on vocabulary in a particular space is for me. It's so that I can look up, and when I see students in a particular area and they're talking with each other, or they're on their computer, or they're writing, that I can make a judgment there about whether or not they are kind of engaged in the approved activities. So students should be talking in vocabulary areas, and maybe they shouldn't be talking in some of the different areas, in the reading space, for example. And it allows you to float as well and focus your instruction. So when you float over to a table, people are doing vocabulary, it's going to increase the amount of students that are talking with each other about vocabulary, which allows you to join in on that. If you have a space that's just for math, it's going to allow students who have a shared interest at that time to work together, help each other, and then to add your space over there. It also keeps it diverse in the room, because every space has a limited number of students that can go there. So that's part of helping students manage the different needs that they have. Maybe I can't work on what I want to work on today because that area is full. So I'll just use that limitation as a reason to go work on something else. Okay. One of the political compass activity, I made sure to show them the link to that. And even I showed them, where I leaned, on here. But I made sure that was included as well. I got there in the morning and I printed out about 4 to 5 copies of whatever was needed in each station. Not 20, I had 20 students, not 20, 4 or 5. And I printed out the stations and the instructions, and I did print out enough trackers for every student. So that's the one that I printed out 20 plus. So our students arrived in the morning. I started my morning meeting. I introduced myself and made sure they understood what was going to happen for the day, and a little preview. And then I did a few things that were important for starting any unit. I introduced the big idea. And after I read the big idea 2 or 3 times, I stopped and I had students speak to each other for about 30 seconds about, in their own words, what did they think that meant. Not for a grade. Again, giving them a chance to talk because they want to talk anyway. So you want to be quiet, give them a chance to talk. They talk to each other. You clap your hands. They're done. And when they're done, you ask not someone to share what they said, you ask someone to share what their partner said. So what did your partner Sarah say? Oh, she said this, okay? Then I would move on to each of the essential questions. That took a few minutes. And then I said, in this unit, we're going to be talking about some of these things, so let's do a fun activity. I went outside and we did the political ideology speed dating game, which was a whole class activity, teacher-led. It's me talking and emceeing this activity. But if you come and see that activity, you're going to notice that 90% of the time, it is students moving and talking. As they had 2 rows of chairs, I had these questions, I guided them, I gave them only 2 minutes, 3 minutes max to speak to each other. I'd read out the question. And what was critical was before we started, I made sure that everyone understood the instructions and the rules. You are going to talk to this person. You are not looking for your romantic match, your friendship match. You are looking for your political ideology match. I'm going to ask you a question. You two are going to share your thoughts about that question. You are going to think about whether or not that person matches your political ideology. If they do, you're going to note that. If they don't, you're also going to note that. We're going to do 8 or 9 rounds here. At the end, you're going to let us know who you think is your best match. And so we had a lot of fun with it. It lasted 30 minutes, I would say. Students got a chance to talk about really hot button issues and get excited about this unit. And at the end, of course, we had students talk about who was their best match, but it didn't really matter, right? There was nothing to turn in. They just all got excited and interested in the unit. While I had them there, once it was over, I then made sure I passed out the tracker and I took my class on a tour of where each station was going to be. And I slowly walked from station to station, making sure they understood what the expectations were at that station. How many students could be there, where the materials were, what they could do with it, what they did when they were finished, whether they could write on it or use their notebook. I made sure that everything that they would need for that station was there and super simple. Really, really, really simple. There was not a lot of stuff for them to have to figure out or do. It was really obvious. I then told them that I honor their breaks and I honor their lunch periods. And so during those times, they were free to make choices for themselves, to recess, check their phones. But during our time, our sacred learning time, it was really important for me that they spend their time doing those things. And if they had a need to do anything outside of that list, then they needed to speak with me. So students went off, they started doing these. And of course, my next move is not to start a reading group, but instead, because I'm really implementing a new system, make sure that I can ensure or make sure that this thing is flowing. So we let students go. A couple students have some questions about what to do. You clarify it. Maybe you make an announcement to the class if it's a common question. Maybe you see someone who's struggling to know what to do first. You give them a suggestion and you let it kind of flow. And once it flows, then your time is spent moving around. So I got to spend some time with a reading group. I got to spend some time with the assessment questions. I got to talk to an individual student who had an issue. During that time, I had also the need to make any big announcements. Like we knew that student council had a meeting, so I had to let them know that was coming and that they were okay. I also made announcements about what we would do before we transitioned to recess or what we would do before we transitioned to lunch. As the time came near for a transition to recess or a transition to lunch, I gave my students a 5-minute warning. Made sure they understood that pretty soon we were going to be shifting and what that meant. A few minutes later, about 2 minutes before their break, I gave them another 2-minute warning. I said, don't end yet, but remember that before we go, we're going to leave this space in a way that we'll be able to return to it. At the end of the day, my instructions were obviously a little bit different, and I made sure that they understood to leave the space as it should be left at the end of the day. I then had student volunteer, which I selected based on students from the student council, to collect all the student trackers. That was one thing, and they placed them in one area for me. And then another student made sure that all the materials that I'd placed around the room were put together. I did have to reorganize them at the end because the papers were in a large stack. And so at the end of the day, apart from a student who arrived super late and needed redirection, and apart from a student who wanted to spend a lot of time working on an advanced placement course, which I approved, everybody else had this opportunity to do a hook activity, be exposed to the big idea and essential questions, to start looking at some of the vocabulary and assessment questions that they might be learning that unit, They had a chance to connect more to that hook by testing their own political ideology. They had a chance to be exposed to some of the literature they might read that unit, and really just like hopefully starting off that week with all this choice. Obviously, when you go back and look back at the trackers, there's some things to reflect upon, like some kids kept better notes than others. So I would use that if I were teaching in subsequent days. I would use that information to re-instruct in my morning meetings about what I'm looking for on a student tracker. Or I might use that information to connect individually with a student to make sure that they know how to do it or that they're actually spending enough time. At the end of the day, excuse me, at the end of the day, it's up to the student to choose what they do. And some students are going to be far more proficient productive. But we have learner characteristics that we can help to measure that and talk with students. And one of the ways that you're going to be able to consistently check in with them is those morning meetings where you're reviewing their trackers. And then all of those weekly sessions that you're doing in reading, writing, and math that give you this opportunity to check in. Not just check in with where they're at in reading, writing, and math, but sometimes to ask them how they're doing on their tracker. So that's it. That's how I did it. If I had been continuing the week in week one, I would have started doing more groups for math, reading, and writing. So I would have started those sessions on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I probably would have done at least one more hook activity just because I think some of those are really fun. And